I Am a Boinger by Billy and the Boingers. This song is kind of a thing of the past. Well, sort of. I mean, it certainly is a fictional band, but in a very different way. Billy and the Boingers were on the printed page first, before any music was played. A virtual band is a band with no public playing musicians, sort of. Bands that seem to fit into this category are Gorillaz, the Canadian band Prozac, and Death Mole. I personally don't think that Milli Vanilli belongs in this list. I know that people on stage weren't the ones actually singing, but there was no story. The band didn't have any backstory to it. Well, until it came out that they were actually lip-syncing every song in every concert that they ever played. Virtual bands need a visual hook. The art style of Gorillaz and the comic origins of Death Mole fit that. They also need a story to back it up. And Billy and the Boingers had that in spades. The band came out of the mind of a cartoonist named Berkeley Breathed. He's an American cartoonist that published daily comic strips for years before writing the storyline for Billy and the Boingers. The characters in the band appeared in his daily syndicated strip Bloom County that started in 1980 and ran until 1989. Mr. Breathed resurrected the strip in 2015. He even won a Pulitzer Prize for the strip. But when I think of this song, I don't think of Opus the Penguin or even Bill the Cat. I think about the Guelph Public Library. You see, it was there when I was a kid that I started reading any books of comic strips that I could find. I mean, I started with the big ones like Peanuts and Garfield. But by the mid-'80s, I think I had read all the Peanuts comic strips ever collected in books. And Garfield was much the same. But those books had an odd shape to them. Long and horizontally thin. I don't know why Jim Davis felt his comic about a cat had to be formatted that way. But, well, it did make it stand out in my mind. I would sit in the library with a stack of Garfield, Peanuts, and even a few Tintin comics and read for hours. Tintin was more of a comic book than a comic strip, but back then I wasn't too picky. You may ask, what's the difference between a comic book or a graphic novel and a comic strip? Well, it goes a little something like this. Comic books tell a story that presents itself through the entire book. A comic strip gets its point across in a few or even one panel. Ziggy and The Far Side are examples of the single panel comic strip. Most people are familiar with the traditional comic strip, though. Those are in a linear format, panels going from left to right in a single row. Good examples of these strips are, well, Calvin and Hobbes, Foxtrot, and Peanuts. And they're always in black and white, except on Sundays, when a special color version was made available. But back then, kids like me would steal the newspaper from their parents just to read the comics. Nowadays, I can't even be sure that daily comic strips are even in the newspapers anymore. It's been that long since I've taken the time to read a physical paper. Most people think that daily comic strips were simply a joke of the day type of thing, that they would use their few panels to tell a single joke or a funny moment. And I can see why, because, well, most strips were actually just like that. But when comics first started appearing in newspapers, storylines were very popular in the dailies. Strips like Dick Tracy's Spider-Man and later Doonesbury and Bloom County all had long-running stories with them in them. When I look back at those times, I'm amazed at the fact that there was no explanation of the characters in the strips. I mean, when I look at the comic book rack, I'm often hesitant to read a book for the first time that has the number like, well, say, 455 on it. Because in my mind, it means I've missed 454 issues of the story beforehand. And I'm certainly not going to go read all that. Sometimes, especially in the Marvel comics back then, there would be a paragraph explaining how the Fantastic Four came into being. But comic strips didn't have the time to waste on things like that. Comic strips cartoonists somehow told a continuing story without telling the reader who everybody was. Their storytelling was just that good. I'll be honest with you. I have very little of my comic strip reading ever come from an actual newspaper. I primarily read the collected books. You know, the books that would collect years of daily strips into one book. That's exactly how I discovered Bloom County, by reading years of strips in a single morning. When I was older and living on my own, I started collecting some of those collected books. I fell in love with Calvin and Hobbes hard, and Sue had every single one of those books. I still believe that the Calvin and Hobbes comic strip is one of the best of all times. During that time, I would occasionally take a chance at something new. I found Bill Ahmed's Foxtrot books that way. They are the perfect blend of family and very nerdy, obscure humor. I still enjoy reading them today. When in the library, I discovered Bloom County. And soon, I wanted to have all those books in my collection. I hunted used bookstores and even checked out the library old book sales to find out and fill my collection. But, as with quite a few things in my various collections, I had a hard time finding them used. So I was forced to buy retail, full price. And that's how I got Burke's Breathe book Billy and the Boingers bootleg. The cover was an homage or a parody of Bruce Springsteen's live 1975-85 record box set, and the back cover was U2's Joshua Tree. Of course, back then, I wasn't the music aficionado that I am today, so I didn't really notice any of that. What I could never miss was the small record inside the front cover. It wasn't in an envelope or anything. It was a flexi disc, which was a simple square piece of plastic with grooves of a 45 record on each side. The story inside was all about the characters creating a band called the Death Tongue, which later became Billy and the Boingers. It's a heavy metal band with Bill the Cat strumming his tongue like a guitar, Opus the Penguin on tuba, and the Rabbit Hodgepodge as the drummer. I thought the whole story was hysterical. Bill was the perfect vocalist and tongue player. I don't really remember being able to play the record when I first got it. Actually, I don't really remember playing it physically at all. But eventually, I did hear the song, and it made me smile. The lyrics are funny and odd, and the music, which has the usual rocky sound, had the occasional boing of Bill's tongue being strummed. A very surreal but incredible experience. The other side, or the B-side, had a song called You Stink But I Love You, performed by the band called Mucky Pup. And no, I'd never heard of them either. The record came about by ways of a contest that Berkeley Breathed held before the release of the book. He called for a song submission for a heavy metal band named Billy and the Boingers. The first two winners got a spot on the record. The winner was I'm a Boinger. There was no artist or band credits on the record. The second place winner was You Stink But I Love You. The band that submitted it was called Mucky Pup. That was their first song to travel wide, as the record was included in all the initial printings of the book. I still love the idea of comic strips, although I do wish there was a way to read them digitally without all the ads taking me out of the fun. It always seems like when I'm ready to read this week's Foxtrot, I'm forced to put up with some annoying eye-catching advertisements along the borders of the webpage. Kinda kills the enjoyment a bit. I miss the days of new Far Side and Calvin and Hobbes comics appearing in my local paper. I'd still buy one if that were the case. But Jim Davis is 77 and has largely stepped back from the Garfield daily strips. Gary Larson is retired to strip The Far Side in 1995, and Bill Watterson completely walked away from Calvin and Hobbes in 1995 as well. Kind of feel too old to be discovering new comic strip nowadays. In fact, in all the books of my collection, there's only one that is still being produced today. That's Foxtrot. Bill Ahmed is still active on his Twitter and regularly puts out new strips every Sunday. I still love Bloom County. I have reread the strips recently, and I'm surprised to find out that they are still as funny as they were when I first read them. Stephen getting his chest hair burnt off in a music video shoot still cracks me up to this day. This song, this record, is a pretty unique piece of music and comic strip history. One that I am proud to say that I got to experience. I urge everyone to go out and read Bloom County. New comic strips are out now. But don't forget to dive into the back catalog as well. I promise you, it'll bring a smile to your face. Thanks for listening to another story that fell out of my head. Do you love comic strips? Are you one of those people who understood all of those Far Side cartoons? If you are, please let me know in the comments below. And as always, please like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time.